So last week, a painting was taken down, Hylas and the Nymphs by Waterhouse, painted in the late 1800s. It was taken down from this art gallery in Manchester. And the person who took it down, or the person who was in charge of taking it down, was this artist named Sonia Boyce, no relation. And then there was a bunch of cries of censorship on the internet, and then she wrote a little op-ed in the Guardian, and I just now went through and I read the whole thing, and I don't think that it's worth really getting into. She does ask some good questions, and she does have that stereotypical at this point self-contradiction that runs through a lot of this stuff, social justice and feminism and contemporary art and stuff like that. One of the things that she said that really sticks with me, even though she bitches about having sound bites, but she made a sound bite of her own, that judgment is at the heart of art. And that attitude, when I first encountered that attitude, this was in the mid to late 90s, that attitude was encapsulated within somebody who was calling themselves a feminist. And since that time, I've always associated feminism with a kind of prudish moralizing, or a sort of way of controlling how the feelings operate and controlling how desire operates and wanting to control how perceptions operate even, right? The male gaze and stuff like that I've talked about before. So I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I read this thing, and I could have done the Benjamin Boyce deconstruction, but I'm screw that, to quote Walter Benjamin, a judgment that is not itself a work of art has no civil rights in the kingdom of art. It just doesn't. If you're going to make an artist statement about art, that statement better the frick be artistic in and of itself, because art itself isn't about judgment. It's about immortality. It's about making something that is pristine and complementary to the forces of life and perpetuates beyond you, the artist. So I'm not going to say that that's what I'm going to give you guys right now, but at least I'm going to dress up what I have to say about femininity with regards to the artist and the relationship between the feminine and the artistic compulsion. I'm going to encapsulate that within words that have been carefully chosen to line up with each other in a semi-arbitrary way called rhyme. So this particular piece is addressed, within the piece, it's addressed to two of the three major archetypes, so far as I'm concerned, of the feminine. And those two, the third one, I try not to look at directly. It's very problematic if you look at that one directly, so I'm just going to skip over her, but I'm going to say she is there, because you get in trouble if you don't mention her. Anyway, so the two explicit ones that this is spoken to are the little girl and the beautiful woman, or the lady fair, as I call her. So, little miss and fair dame, I present to you a single frame through which to view a worried problem that's for ages beguiled us men. For by nature, we are apt at faithfully representing the acts and motivations and effects of personalities complex within our writ of our brothers, and yet our sisters we tend to other. And why? What lack of sympathy causes us to generically allocate you lofty roles of truth, desire, distressed damsels, temptress, victim, passive-aggressive martyr, virgin, or excessive emoter, wailing, fainting, sighing? But who in modern times is buying any of this? It's considered bad writing to rely on these, albeit inviting, well-worn tropes of characterization. And yet, I contend that the manifestation of femininity in myth, it requires that a distillate be produced from stereotype until what's extracted is the archetype. And if the poet wishes to, the varied symbols feminine use in his work, then how should he approach that which in you he sees, which he can't see inside himself? For in his psyche, there is a veil that covers, perhaps for a good reason, what is feminine within him. For life would have more of life made, and a boy is generally built to find in a maid a completion which fulfills his debt to life, for life, and to the poet, must fulfill his debt to culture, both the structures of four fathers and two, the pleated, expansive drapes that all foremothers for us have made. And so the poet, he must venture into aspects of his nature that he can only see outside him. And so it is that he idealizes them at first, and then he gradually refines them toward actuality. But let me ask you this. What's most actual to him? I don't think it's the facts so much as the phenomenon, the powers that he senses pulsing round him, in him, ever coursing through knots of consequence and heats, filling him with passions great. And maybe the epic poet of yore, before embarking on his lore, was wise to first evoke the Muses, to guard him from pratfalls and ruses of his ambition to all existence contain within his edifice, which, if he assembles without grace, will prove itself a succession of states, each pronounced for their own sake. For his ambition works to concentrate actions and passions from which he isolates the fuels that run his engine, that tweaked and timed combination of gyre, cylinder, pump, and piston, oil sump, camshaft, transmission, all brought to life by combustion of vapors spent into percussive revving, going, and some emissions. And yet, were he to follow his ambition to its end, his epic enterprise would seek to mechanize all of life and totalize a view of the world that calcifies the fecund harmoniousness that thrives and beckons from the seed its eye, so proudly linking earth to sky. So that the Muses he summons up, not for inspiration at first so much as his desire to respectfully stray not far from the subtle weave that is the basis of all bounty, without which he could hardly soundly convey intimacy and warm contact within that grandiose conflict, which is his theme, the ambitious thrust of empire, power, and man's lust to overcome the dictators in life and kingdom and phylum and order, and two, the tyrant in his own self. Whilst the poet knows that self itself relies on warm affection, coddling, and soft attention, and tenderness, and sentiment, and non-paternal sorts of judgment, and two, that soft envelopment which affords the development of all that is refined within culture. You see, there is no mankind without the mother. Without imprisoned beloved, there's no abducting lover. Without sagacious sister, there's no devoted brother. There is no interesting me without an interested other. And so the Muses that the lowly poet conjures, although they are idealized forms, they assist him in what he performs. They orient him through the storms that he incites to deform the norms that tether his audience to habits that he through willfulness or talent must break from, whilst ever minding the matrices that are providing that complex scaffold of identity which his conflict converts to casualties, and bad art with lack of subtlety degrades into customarily wary cliches. These engendered qualities, which in progressive ideologies are critiqued as rigid binaries or as spectrums, should refinery be the scheme of those whose primary adversary is the hegemony of categories, which urgently we all need to dismantle in perpetuity and presumably manhandle into being a society freely springing from a watery swapping of properties casually copied from some sort of socially idyllic glossary that can finally Consequently, febrifugely flush all anxiety from our characteristically ill-at-ease psyches, infinitely vacillating sense of self-esteem. Cogito ego sum. Cogito ego sum. These qualities the poet approaches cautiously. For at their heart, it might be that he sees that life itself, its energies, has concentrated into polarities, e.g., masculinities, femininities, and he, within his visionary capacity, must ever warily approach, and not foolhardily evoke to play with naughtily, but in devout propriety beg the Muses their unequivocally bequeathed leave to imbue into his epic theme their omniscient naivety and supple, buoyant intimacy, and to their intuitive wickedry, and not least of all the chastity that they lease to he who valiantly swears to century and felicity their locality from the pernicity of his ceaseless beastly rapacity, which unseemly greed, if he lets leak, will tweak his nymphs into nemeses who will sweep down shrieking from the forest trees to rend his epic into balladry and massacre his ambition into a malady of disharmonious, cacophonous schlockery, the mighty maker, now purveyor of bargain ben debris. Thus he, the poet, genuflects himself before certain aspects that he thinks of as female and calls his muses, for the feminine is what enthuses him. And maybe this act reduces real women into the material that he uses to assemble forms that he chooses disregardless of the abuses of lesser poets, who fail to comprehend what is entailed in the reduction of living people into poetic essence. Consider momentarily Diesel. Not the trendy Italian clothing brand, but the gas. The way in which one extracts diesel from fat or canola oil is to add to the oil some ethanol or another kind of alcohol, and then a catalyst, such as lye, and then agitate and apply either heat or simply time until the solution recombines into the fuel and the dross, the former which is siphoned off. Now, it might be that a similar process the poet, as a distiller, is working when he looks at life, extracts its oils, and combines a measure of high-proof spirit and just a dash of quickening lyric, and then a heat or studied pressure he bears upon it until the ester is ready to be put in engine to fuel his epic composition. Things just freaking have to explode, don't they? And so, dear Miss and Dame, I return us to that single frame through which to view this my problem. How might I make of you emblems, not only of femininity, but entities volitionally endowed, in order that my work be built upon foundations sure, partaking in masculinities, bestial, jocular, effete, as well as femininities, which you two are the epitomes of, for me. How may I faithfully reflect you, non-narcissistically, but in assured authenticity, of voices tuned with consistency to whatever it is that I call fate, and worry, and chaos, and temperance, and space, and wisdom, and seeming, and melody, and memory, and faith, and harmony, and, not least of all, the wide-eyed one, my filial saint of the imagination. I beg you answer on behalf of those that I see in you. Would they grant me not command, but a genuine receptivity to what is feminine? That's it. Good night.